Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. This week, our subject is Catherine Howard. King Henry and Catherine were married by Bishop Bonner of London at Oatlands Palace on the 28th of July, 1540, the same day that Cromwell was executed. So that was a bit of a message. She was a teenager, and he was 49. Catherine adopted the French motto that in English meant, no other will but his. So that kind of says it all. The marriage was made public on the 8th of August, and prayers were said in the chapel royal at Hampton Court Palace. Henry indulged her every whim. Catherine was young, joyous, and carefree. She was too young to take part in administrative matters of state. Nevertheless, every night, Sir Thomas Heneage, groom of the stool, came to her chamber to report on the king's well-being. No plans were made for a coronation, yet she still traveled downriver on the royal barge into the city of London to a gun salute and some acclamation. She was settled by jointure at Baynard's Castle. Little changed at court, other than the arrival of many Howards. Every day she dressed with new clothes in the French fashion, bedecked with precious jewels, decorated in gold around her sleeves. Sugar daddy, that's the vibe. The king didn't seem to remember how to behave in public. It was noted that he kept pawing at his new wife, more so than he had done before. The queen escaped plague-ridden London in August 1540 while on progress. The royal couple's entourage traveled on honeymoon through Reading and Buckingham. Mostly a Henry trip, it was hunting lodge to hunting lodge. But the people seemed to love their new Queen Catherine. The king embarked on a lavish spending spree to celebrate his marriage, with extensive refurbishments and developments at the Palace of Whitehall. This was followed by more expensive gifts for Christmas and Hampton Court Palace. He also invited his ex-wife, Anne, who he now called his sister, and who his current wife had been lady-in-waiting for, to Christmas. Awkward. But it wasn't. Anne had stayed away from court to give the new Queen Catherine time to establish herself as the new queen. She then joined them for Christmas and, by all accounts, had a great time. That winter, the king's bad moods deepened and grew more furious, caused in part by pain from his ulcerous legs. He accused counselors of being lying time servers, meaning liars who are also bad at their job. He also had begun to regret executing Cromwell. Cromwell was his ride or die lawyer who set up one bad blind date / marriage and was executed for it to a woman he was still friendly with and had just spent Christmas with. Mistakes were made. After a dark and depressed March, this mood lifted at Easter. Preparations were in place for any signs of a royal pregnancy. Reported by Marliac on the 15th of April, if it be found true to have her crowned, meaning she would be crowned as soon as she provided an heir. Catherine wasn't getting along with her stepdaughter, Mary. Mary was 8 years older than her new stepmother and was having trouble taking her seriously as the new queen. Mary hadn't had a good relationship with her other stepmother, Anne Boleyn. Queen Catherine likely reminded her of Anne, and it was, after all, Anne's cousin. Catherine didn't appreciate the disrespect and even took a couple of ladies away from Mary as punishment because she was queen and she was a teenager and she could do that. Mary had been close with her last stepmother, the short-lived Anne of Cleves. She was rad. Check out her episode. Catherine's relationships with her other stepchildren was good, but not close. They were only 6 and 3 years old by this point. Catherine may have been involved during her marriage to the king with Henry's favorite male courtier, Thomas Culpeper, a young man who had succeeded him in the queen's affection according to Derham's later testimony. She had considered marrying Culpeper during the time of her maid of honor to Anne of Cleves. Remember, when Derham just showed up professing his undying love because he heard a rumor? That was now evidence. Derham was throwing his weight around court a little. He flexed about his closeness with the Queen. He got called out and mouthed off in a drunken rant. He wasn't making any friends at court. Culpeper called Catherine "my little sweet fool" in a love letter. It has been alleged that in spring 1541, the pair were meeting secretly. Their meetings were allegedly arranged by one of Catherine's older ladies-in-waiting, Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford. Lady Rochford, the widow of Catherine's executed cousin George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's brother. Thomas Culpeper served in the king's privy chamber. He knew the king was unhealthy and was likely just hoping that after his death, Catherine would go to him. People who claimed to have witnessed her earlier sexual behavior while she lived at Lambeth reportedly contacted her for favors in return for their silence. And some of these blackmailers may have been appointed to her royal household to keep them quiet. John Lascelles, a supporter of the executed Cromwell, approached the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, telling him that his sister Mary refused to become part of the Queen's household, stating that she had witnessed the light ways of Queen Catherine while they were living together at Lambeth. Cranmer then interrogated Mary Lascelles, who alleged that Catherine had sexual relations while under the Duchess of Norfolk's care before her relationship with the king. Cranmer immediately took up the case to topple his rivals, the Roman Catholic Norfolk family. Lady Rochford was interrogated, and she feared that she would be tortured, so she agreed to talk, and she spilled everything. She told how she had watched Catherine's back stairs as Culpeper had made his escapes from the Queen's room. During the investigation, a love letter written in the Queen's distinctive handwriting was found in Culpeper's chambers. This is the only letter that has survived other than her later confession. On All Saints' Day, the 1st of November, 1541, the king was praying in the chapel. There, he received a letter describing the allegations against Catherine. On the 7th of November, 1541, Archbishop Cranmer led a delegation of counselors to Winchester Palace in Southwark to question her. Even the staunch Cranmer found the teenage Catherine's frantic, incoherent state pitiable, saying, "I found her in such lamentation and heaviness as I never saw no creature, so that would have pitied any man's heart to have looked upon her." He ordered the guards to remove any objects she might use to commit suicide. Catherine is said to have at one point run through the halls screaming for Henry. She wasn't able to get to him, but remember, she was a teenager who had panic attacks and things were falling apart around her. Her husband, the king, left the castle the next day, never to return to her. Establishing the existence of a pre-contract between Catherine and Derham would have had the effect of terminating Catherine's marriage to Henry. But it would also have allowed Henry to annul their marriage and banish her from court to live in poverty and disgrace instead of executing her, although there is no indication that Henry would have chosen that alternative. Catherine steadfastly denied any pre-contract, maintaining that Derham had raped her. Catherine was stripped of her title as queen on the 23rd of November, 1541, and was imprisoned in the new Sion Abbey, Middlesex, formerly a convent, where she remained throughout the winter of 1541. She was obliged by a privy councillor to return the ring previously owned by Anne of Cleves, which the king had given her. It was a symbol of the removal of her rightful and lawful rights. Yes, he gave his fifth wife a ring he had gotten for his fourth wife. Classy. Henry didn't enjoy dealing with mouthy, irrational women. Even if that woman was his wife, who he had arrested, I wonder why she's emotional, Henry. Despite these actions, her marriage to Henry was never formally annulled. When Lady Rochford was brought in for questioning again, she was seized with raving madness. Culpeper and Durham were arraigned at Guildhall on the 1st of December 1541 for high treason. They were executed at Tyburn on the 10th of December 1541. Culpeper being beheaded and Durham being hanged, drawn, and quartered. According to custom, their heads were placed on spikes on the London Bridge. Many of Catherine's relatives were also detained in the Tower, tried, found guilty of concealing treason, and sentenced to life imprisonment and forfeiture of goods. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, distanced himself from the scandal by retreating to Kenninghall to write a letter of apology, laying all the blame on his niece and his stepmother. He was kind of a jerk, but he was doing damage control. His son, Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, a poet, remained a favorite of the king. Meanwhile, the king sunk farther and farther into morbidity and indulged his appetite for food and women. He was now the man people think of when they think of King Henry VIII. He was a big, loud, angry man, probably eating a turkey leg or being entertained by young women. If you watch Game of Thrones, think Robert Baratheon. Catherine remained in limbo until Parliament introduced on the 29th of January 1542 a Bill of Attainder, which was passed on the 7th of February of that same year. The Royal Assent by Commission Act made it treason and punishable by death for a queen consort to fail to disclose her sexual history to the king within 20 days of their marriage, or to incite someone to commit adultery with her. The old "don't be too tempting" trope. Kind of over that. The measure retroactively solved the matter of Catherine's supposed pre-contract and made her unequivocally guilty. No formal trial was held. The crime she was committed of was not even a law at the time it happened, and it was too late for her to remedy it. When the lords of the council came for her, she allegedly panicked and screamed as they manhandled her into a barge that would escort her to the Tower on Friday, February 10. I'm not even going to blame the panic attacks this time. She was a teenager, married to someone nearly 3 times her age, and she fell in love with someone else and was being executed for it. Divorce? Valid. Beheading? A bit much. Her flotilla passed under the London Bridge, where the heads of Culpeper and Durham were impaled, and where they remained until 1546. That's 4 years for anyone who doesn't want to math it. Again, a bit much. Entering through the Traitor's Gate, she was led to her prison cell. The next day, the Bill of Attainder received royal assent, and her execution was scheduled for 7 a.m. on Monday, the 13th of February. Arrangements for the execution were supervised by Sir John Gage, in his role as Constable of the Tower. The night before her execution, Catherine is believed to have spent many hours practicing how to lay her head upon the block, which had been brought to her at her request. If she had to be executed, she at least wanted to look cute. We can't forget that she was still only 19. She died with relative composure, but looked pale and terrified. She required assistance to climb the scaffold. According to popular folklore, her last words were, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." But no eyewitness accounts support this, instead reporting that she stuck to traditional final words, asking for forgiveness for her sins and acknowledging that she deserved to die 1,000 deaths for betraying the king, who had always treated her so graciously. She described her punishment as worthy and just, and asked for mercy for her family and prayers for her soul. This was typical of the speeches given by people executed during that period, most likely in an effort to protect their families. Since the condemned last words would be relayed to the king, Catherine was then beheaded with the executioner's axe. Francois I, when told by Sir William Paget how the queen had wonderfully abused the king, laid his hands on his heart and announced that by his faith as a gentleman that she hath done wondrous naughtly. Upon hearing the news of Catherine's execution, King Francois wrote a letter to King Henry regretting the lewd and naughty behavior of the Queen, and advising him that the lightness of women cannot bend the honor of men. Yes, the Honorable Francois I. Honorable he was not. But back to England. Lady Rochford was executed immediately thereafter on Tower Green. She had survived the Anne Boleyn scandal. Her husband had been executed in that same scandal, but not this time. Both bodies were buried in an unmarked grave in the nearby chapel of St. Peter, where the bodies of Catherine's cousin, Anne, and George Boleyn also lay. Other cousins were also in the crowd, including the Earl of Surrey. King Henry did not attend Catherine's funeral. Catherine's body was not one of those identified during the restorations of the chapel during Queen Victoria's reign. She is commemorated on a plaque on the west wall dedicated to all those who died in the tower. And that is where we will leave it for this week. What did you think of Catherine Howard? I think she's relatable. She had understandable anxiety issues given how her life had unfolded before she was old enough to look out for herself. And she only lived 19 years. She wasn't even a full adult yet. With almost all of that, plus exactly zero support, and just a lot of relatives using her as a tool. I don't know that I would have done any better at that age in those circumstances, and I probably would have done much worse. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend. If you hated it, share with an enemy. I'm not picky. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next week, bye.